As a child of the 80s and 90s, I hold 16-bit platforming games very high in my regard and in my nostalgia factor. For me, these were the quintessential mascot platformers and really baked into the fabric of society and pop culture what gaming really is today. Super Catboy tries to emulate this with a retro old school throwback to 16-bit era platformers, very 2D, full of lots of comical capers, a little bit of sass and pizzazz to go with it, but tries to bring along some new features too. And what it does is fuse together a 16-bit platformer with a Contra-ish style old school run and gun, and some elements of side-scrolling beat-em-ups from your Streets of Rage and things like that. Expect all of that dumbed down to a very surface deep level, and that's probably how I would describe Super Catboy. In this game, you play as the Super Catboy, who is busy trying to beat up various different hench dogs in following pursuit of an evil scientist that wants to take over the world. Now, you do this alongside your femme fatale sidekick, who quite often dumps you at the beginning of levels for you to then go off and shoot and kick and claw your way around the different levels. The first thing I want to say about this game is that the platforming is an acquired taste. And by that, I mean that Super Catboy has quite a lot of different moves. They can jump, they can slide and claw down a wall very slowly, which makes precision jumping off of walls really quite easy. But they can also cling and kind of grapple up walls, and much more than just wall jumping. You can actually get up vertical walls, relatively simple so long as you time it quite nicely. The flip side of this, though, is that the actual jump mechanic is really, really floaty, and it doesn't really feel like you're truly in control of Super Catboy once he's up and in the air. And this makes it for a really odd mix of some really cool moves and some tight precision and some grounded gravity until you come to jump, and then you're like, I'm not sure it's all connecting. Sometimes this then evokes some really cheap deaths that you kind of go, I don't feel like that was my fault. But on the whole, once you get used to it, you can largely predict what Super Catboy is going to do. It just never quite feels as satisfying as what I was hoping it would do. That then leads me on to the second part of the game's kind of thumbs up / thumbs down at the same time, and that's the level design. There's loads of levels in Super Catboy, and not only do the backgrounds, which absolutely look beautiful, keep changing up constantly, but you also get various different mini levels in between. So there's a few where you're riding around on a minecart and having to jump over different dogs or duck underneath low ceilings and jump across different gaps, and they're quite cool. There's a few where you're on a riding train, and it is still a 2D platformer, but there's points where the chain disconnects some of its carriages and you have to do a sprint jump to try and get over it, and so it feels like a cross between an endless runner style thing but also a 2D platformer. There's also some other ones where you're driving on a motorcycle, and this runs very similar to retro, almost like side-scrolling road rash style games where you need to shoot and kind of maneuver yourself around, a bit like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sewer levels, I guess, is probably the better description of that. Because you're constantly in motion, but so is everyone else around you, and so you have to put yourself in the right position to then shoot back and forth. Again, though, the level designs are quite rudimentary, and whilst it does offer some potential branching paths or so on and so forth as you find all of the different coins, kill all of the enemies, and find 4 pieces of a golden cat to get 100% completion per level, it's quite linear, and it doesn't feel like it's really inspired to conducive going off the beaten track and going exploring and finding genuine surprises. Everything is really well telegraphed and overly telegraphed, and the corridor nature of the levels are quite narrow. And when they do then branch off, it's almost Metroidvania-esque in that you know where you need to go because there's only a couple of routes to start off with. And so you kind of still move around a central point by design rather than just keep on going left or from left to right all the way through a level. That might sound like a really odd thing to talk about when you're going for a 2D platformer, but that level design combined with the fact that when you get attacked by an enemy, There's no invincibility frame, so it feels quite unfair because I'll take, for instance, there's these like yappy bulldogs that charge at you, and if they hit you once, they keep hitting you as you bounce back because there's no invincibility to kind of recover. So you just get hit, dead. And you kind of go, well, what on earth was I supposed to do to avoid that? And sometimes the hit detection isn't quite perfect, so you lose lives through no particular fault of your own, or doing the same thing twice and getting different results, which is a particular pet peeve of mine. Then when you add in the slightly too unresponsive jump mechanic and the floaty nature of that, there's just little things that add up that make for a fun and pleasant experience, but it isn't quite that top tier of 16-bit platforming golden deliciousness that that the marketing promised, basically. The other thing I want to call out is that this game calls itself a platformer with run and gun elements, but I would argue that it's actually a run and gun with platforming elements, because the platforming is largely really quite simplified until the final third of the game, where you're swinging around on loads of like swingy ropes, and it all feels a little bit Disney's Lion King / Aladdin going on with a bit of Earthworm Jim thrown in. And that's all well and good and fine, but all the way up to that point, the platforming is heavily simplified to enable the run and gun mechanics to work. And so whilst running and gunning is fine, it markets itself more as a platformer with run and gun elements, and it really is the other way around. So just be aware of that going in. The last thing and I want to end this review on a positive note, because I did, for all of my moaning, I did enjoy my time with Super Catboy, I promise. I really want to give a shout out to the soundtrack. It's this mixture of hair rock meets 16-bit chip rock. And although the melodies aren't ones that get stuck in your head repeatedly over and over and over again, they're just really solid bangers. And so I would quite happily listen to the soundtrack outside of the game. And indeed will go and find a way to do so. I bet the soundtrack's out on Bandcamp somewhere. And so, yeah, I'll give that an absolute thumb up, because it gives that kind of catitude that now enables the game to have style and pizzazz. And Super Catboy absolutely does that. It just doesn't quite have that top tier moment-to-moment gameplay feel to back it up. It reminds me a little bit of AI art, I guess. You can replicate quite a lot of the features, but when it gets down to that true artistic feeling, you can't copy that. You have to learn that all. And it's that little element where Super Catboy feels like it's just lost its edge compared to some of its other peers. Would I still recommend it? Yes. But just know going in, it's a run and gun with platforming elements, and that it will feel a little bit loose and free, and potentially a little bit clumsy when you're in the thick of the action. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/Higher Network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.